Hello, coaches. Welcome back to another episode of Coach Better Spotlight. My name is Kim Capino, and I'm here to help you coach better. After decades as a teacher and coach in international schools, I founded my company, Eduro Learning, to help you recognize and leverage your influential leadership so you can move from feeling like just a teacher to a confident leader in your school community, however that looks for you. I work with clients around the world through our certificate programs and private mentoring packages, and today's episode highlights a whole team of aspiring and growing leaders that I've had the honor of working with inside the Women Who Lead Global cohort. If you have a topic you'd like to hear us talk about or a guest you'd like to see on the podcast, please leave a comment below, join our Coach Better Facebook group, or find us on social media at Eduro Learning and send me a DM. Today, we have a fantastic panel featuring graduates of our first cohort of Women Who Lead. Maki, Carrie, and Taria were all part of our annual global cohort of Women Who Lead. Although each of them came to the program with different professional backgrounds, they were all seeking clarity, confidence, and community around their leadership capacity. This Spotlight episode focuses on recognizing your potential to lead and how our graduates felt before joining the program. In the full-length podcast episode, we talk about where these women started in terms of their leadership journey, what held them back from moving forward, and how the Women Who Lead experience helped them take that next step professionally. To listen to the full episode, subscribe to Coach Better wherever you get your podcasts. Are you ready to take the leap into leadership but not sure how to get started? Need the confidence to take the next step in your career? Do you want to be inspired by over 70 successful female leaders from schools around the world? Join us for our next global cohort of Women Who Lead. Women Who Lead will empower you to recognize and articulate your leadership potential so you can overcome the many challenges faced by women seeking leadership positions in the field of education. You'll learn with aspiring and growing leaders inside our connected, collaborative, and community-driven global cohort. Now is your chance to level up your leadership and reach for your dream job. Our global cohorts open only once a year. Get all the details at edurolearning.com/women. I'm going to start with Maki. I'll try to go back and forth. And then if you want to jump in, please feel free to jump in. Maki, before you started Women Who Lead, and maybe I know that when you wrote to me when you were first interested in Women Who Lead, one of the things that you said is you were transitioning to a new school and you had felt like your experience in the VP position was, I think the way you phrased it to me was something like a vertical learning curve. Your learning curve was vertical, right? So tell us a little bit about that transition, maybe even from literacy coaching to VP, and then your kind of feelings before taking on the role that you have now. Where were you at? What were you thinking about? You could talk about things that were going well and things that you were struggling with, just to give us an idea of your mindset at that kind of transition point.
So I think that I feel that being a teacher is very different from being a coach. And then being a coach, you start understanding a little bit more of the school structure and how leadership works. And then you go into the vice principal and coordinator position, and then you realize there's a lot more to it. And so I do believe that it has been a vertical learning curve to the moon in general for me, from going from being a teacher to the literacy coach into the vice principal position and a coordinator position, and then coming into this current position as a head of early years and primary. It has all been just vertical because it's so different. Every position is so different in one way, but then you start understanding the school structure and how the school works. And it's helpful, and it's a learning curve. And I feel that I'm still learning. I'm still having this vertical kind of learning curve at this moment, and I hope that it won't be as steep as it has been for the past few years. I do think that in one way I've stuck to this opportunity as a learning experience. And I also feel that the most important thing that I need to think about is, what would I do if I were the teacher? How would I feel as a teacher? What do I need as a teacher? And so as a leader, what I want to go back to is, what would I need as a teacher? What would I want as a teacher? What would I appreciate as a teacher? So I think because I've been a teacher for such a long time, that's the most important part, is putting myself in the teacher's position and then allowing myself to say, okay, I have this much control in my role. How can I make it easier for the teachers, and how can I support the teachers?
I really appreciate that, coming back to what teachers need and keeping that in mind as you are in that leadership position, because I really liked the way you were talking about, or I really appreciate or connected with the way you were talking about how being a teacher is different than being a coach, and being a coach is different than being, let's say, a coordinator or a vice principal. And that's even different from being a full-time principal. And I'm sure that we all saw in the Women Who Lead interviews, that's very different than being a head of school. And so that layering of skills is really resonates with me. And I think that when leaders think about how that would feel, how that would be perceived by, what that would look like when those decisions are handed down to teachers, it really helps you stay connected to the classroom. But I do want to dig into ask you another little question about, tell us a little bit about what you started to see differently when you became a coach, and then what you started to see differently when you became a principal. Like, what were those layers like? I'm curious, kind of what you saw. In what ways did that open your eyes?
Okay, that's a really, really big question. I think as a coach, I realized, so one thing that as teachers we need all the time is time. So I had to find this balance of, how much time can I take from the teachers so that I can do the coaching part, but not stress them out too much that they feel overwhelmed with the time. I think that was the most important part that I've actually learned. And then the other part of coaching is, each teacher needs something different. And and as adult learners, we don't want to do this like top-down approach of like, you need to do this, and this is how you're going to get better. So I really love this Diane Sweeney, I believe, student-centered coaching, where you want to look at the student data, and then you want to ask the questions. You might know the answer to the question, and you might know the solution to the question, but you want teachers to get to that part. And it's kind of this, we need to kind of be patient as a coach to make sure that that person gets to that point. But also as a teacher, when I was being coached, I remember this part as well, where I'm like, I'm okay with this. I think this is great. I don't know if I want to change anything. And so really knowing that part as well, patience has been one thing that I've learned as a coach, but also understanding that we are all on a different path towards teaching better, being a better teacher. And then going in from that to being a coordinator, coordinators also have requirements or the deadlines or whatever we need to actually get done. So we can't really have this coaching approach where it's okay, we can take time to get to where you need to be, because you need to get that unit planner done. You need to get that, report card done. And we need to have these little ATLs going on, or we have to have these skills kind of taught, or whatever that means. So there is a little bit more of a time constraint as a coordinator, but also important documents that need to be done before accreditation happens, for example, or before report card happens. And so I think that was a little bit different from being a coach. Coach is like, yay, go, let's get going. And you can do this. And let's celebrate the next step. And let's celebrate the next step. But then like the coordinator position is more like, yay, but you need to do this. Yay, but we need to actually, teach to standards. And so that's a little bit different from being a coach, I would say. And then as a VP, you do deal more with parents as well. So as a coordinator and coach, you don't deal with any of that. You just deal with the teachers, right? But then as a coordinator, you actually have to deal with, or as a VP, you need to deal with parents. So like parents might come to you instead of the principal or the head of school. You might also have teachers come to you with problems because they don't feel comfortable talking to the principal. And so you have this other area that you are dealing with, and you have to be a good listener. You have to actually listen and understand. You might not be able to change the situation. And more often than not, you can't. So you have to actually really kind of go through that. I'm going to listen. I'm going to see what I can do. I will voice your opinion, or I will try to talk to the principal or the head of school about this, and I'll let you know. And you need to find this strategic way of talking to that person.
Woo! I had all the feels listening to you go through those different levels. That is so relatable. And I appreciate that. Well, what I think is interesting about that is coming in at any one of those points, you could grow to the next level in Women Who Lead. And I think that's really cool. Like if you come in as a coach, you have this perspective of being a supporter of teachers. You know how important that is. You know that challenge of time and that balance of that kind of making sure you're pushing a little bit, but you're not overwhelming people. Or you can come in at that level of a coordinator and know that you have these additional responsibilities. And how do I make that work? How do I manage those deadlines? Or you can come in as a VP realizing, oh, now my strategic conversations, a lot of them are going up. And I'm needing to communicate in a way, in an advocacy way that maybe I hadn't for others, that maybe I hadn't before. So those layers are really interesting to hear. And you describe them all so well. So thank you for that. Really appreciate that. I'm going to ask Taria, how about you? Where were you at in your career when you came to Women Who Lead, and where did you want to go? What were you thinking? What were your goals? What were you kind of looking at moving towards?
I'm still figuring out what I want to be when I grow up. So, but I will say that one of the things that I loved about Women Who Lead, and some of the things that Maki and Kim, you were just mentioning, was how often I didn't see myself in certain roles. But after hearing so many women talk about how they, specifically an administrator, some sort of principal, vice principal, like I knew that was not my path. And I still pretty much know that's not my path. But I felt much more confident in how they were able to portray this path in a much more coaching. They had like that aspect of coaching and that aspect of support and that aspect of student centeredness from teachers. And like, I hadn't necessarily had that experience before. And so hearing these women talk about it in a way that was completely contradictory almost to my own experience made me think, well, I could do that if I wanted to. So for me, one of the things that I loved, as I've mentioned in courses, like technology related, I definitely saw myself more as a coach. Maki hit it right on. I love being a resource and that person that people can go to. I want to sit, I want to look. I love curriculum. I am one of those teachers that I spend hours on my curriculum and I detail down to like the most minute part because I love it. I love planning it. I love creating and engaging activities. I like matching the ATL skills and figuring out what works. Like that is me. And as you can tell, I get so excited just talking about it. So there's that aspect, but I love the aspect of coaching as being there as a support in terms of allowing people to just have a different perspective and have a different set of eyes. And with my school being as small as it has been, I was often the only one teaching my subject. And so that didn't always lend itself. There were occasionally I might share like a section with another person, but for the majority of the time, I've been the only one teaching it. And so the aspect of collaboration, and thankfully I've had amazing coworkers that I can be like, hey, can you take a look at this lesson? Something's missing. What am I not seeing? Especially when you're spending like hours and hours on end working on something. And so that was definitely where that is my passion. Even as a teacher, I love teaching, but I don't mind the curriculum, the unit planners, all of those things, because I always have a vision and I always have the end in mind. And for me, it makes sense to document all of that down to every step so that I'm able to explain it in the best way possible. So when I first started the Women Who Lead, I was looking at the coaching program. And when I was looking at that, because I was like, this seems like, I think coaching is really my thing, maybe a coordinator. I'm a huge proponent of the MYP, the middle years program for the IB. I love it. It makes sense to me holistically and how, teaching students. So I thought maybe that might be something that I was interested in doing. And as I said, I'm still kind of filling out my footing for it, but the resource aspect and being able to be like, I know where to find this and I can help you with that. And, oh, you want this? Cool. I've been looking at this tool that I've been using. And oftentimes through the Tech Ambassador program, I was teaching teachers how to give efficient and quick feedback immediately, so that as soon as you're assessing students, it reduces time, it's efficient, and students have immediate feedback. So I watched like a ton of videos on it, created Google Forms, and I'm appending them to different documents. And at the end of the year, my students, for every summative they have pages and pages of feedback for me. And the front loading, like teaching teachers how to just front load some of the work so that the rest of the year goes a little bit smoother. And so I'm definitely one of the ones that, like, if it's going to save me this much time in the end, but I need to put more time now, I can do that because I see that end goal. And so I think that's been really important for me, is having that big picture. What is the end curriculum? What is the end for my time? What is the end for my efficiency? What tools do I need? What tools do the students need? What is the end goal? And how can I get back to the beginning to share that?
So when you're sharing all of that about and I totally forgot that when you started Women Who Lead, you were going back and forth between the coach and Women Who Lead. So I'm glad you reminded me. You're not the only person who has said that. So I think that's really interesting. And it gets back to Maki's point about how coaching is that like next level view of what's going on in the school. And so people who are curious about that next level view are curious about coaching. They're curious about leadership. They're curious about all these other different steps forward. So I totally forgot about that. That was really cool. So thinking about that, when you came into Women Who Lead and you were looking at like your next growth area, you were looking at a way to be more collaborative, more connected, supporting teachers more. And your school, I'm summarizing now, your school is a little bit small. So you felt like you weren't sure what that could look like because you didn't have so many, like, not necessarily even role models, but so many positions to just experience.
Yeah, and we didn't have a lot of positions that were available, and they're starting to open up next year a few more. So that's exciting. But yeah, I've been here for a decade, and like, I remember when I first started, there was one principal for secondary and one principal for elementary. And it was that way for a long time. And I think about maybe 5 years ago, it split. And then I think 3 years ago, we got an IB coordinator. And like next year, I think it's splitting again. So there wasn't a ton of opportunities in terms of coming up for me to kind of like go into that with my current school.
And I think that's a really good point to mention, because it may be that you don't have a potential position in your school, but it doesn't mean that that position doesn't exist. And or it may be that you don't have a role model for the type of leader you want to be in your school, but that doesn't mean that doesn't exist. And I think sometimes we get so have the blinders on because of our school. Oh, this can't possibly happen because I'm so used to what my school is like. And then you see it happening elsewhere. You hear stories and you're like, oh, that is possible. Maybe it might not be possible at this school, and that's okay. That doesn't mean anything about the school. It doesn't mean anything about me. It's just not possible right here, right now, but it is possible in the broader world. And I think that's a thing that we bring to all of our programs, because we have this like global model where we're looking at what things look like in a variety of different schools, a variety of different settings. And it can be hard to see, I don't know if that's forest through the trees, but it can be hard to see all of those global opportunities if you don't have them right in your setting. So I totally get that and appreciate that. Carrie, tell us a little bit.
That's the nature of international schools as well, because a lot of them are quite small. There's oftentimes, I can remember back when I became a tech integrationist, and we brought in iPads, and my mom was like, well, surely there's somebody who can ask questions about this. And I'm like, yeah, no. Like we're on the beginning, right? We're at the front. There's nobody else to really talk to, kind of thing. And so I had to really hunt and find people. And I think when you're in a small international school, especially, like you said, sometimes those positions aren't in your school, but also sometimes your school doesn't even realize that those positions are options within their school. Like you finding out that that's a position in another school and learning about it and explaining it and then bringing it to your school can be really powerful with how to move things along too.
Yes, absolutely. And I think that is something that when people join our programs, that's one of the things they say, well, how does this look in other schools? What does this look like in other schools? What are coaches doing in other schools? What leadership positions are available in other schools? Because if you have the evidence that this position exists, it's a lot easier to try to advocate for it. Carrie, tell us a little bit about where you were at before you started Women Who Lead, kind of where you wanted to go. What were your goals? What were you thinking about at that time?
Well, I was finishing up or had just finished up the coach. So I had gone through that program. Our school had 5 elementary school coaches, and we were working through developing our program and what that meant. And I think for me, the main thing was trying to see, like Taria, I was zero interest in administration, principal, vice principal, director. And that doesn't interest. So what are the other options? Like what else is out there? And you're absolutely right. That coordinator strand and tech director and strand was a big strand for me. The other strand that was a big strand for me was your consultant strand. Just because of the variety of how those women got to where they are or what they were doing. So there were a lot of directors of teaching and learning that I watched. Because for a lot of them, they had unusual ways to get there. It wasn't all straight curriculum all the way through. But also they're people who my roles generally work alongside, possibly are a part of the team, possibly are just paralleling each other. And so we're always working and coordinating together. But because I don't want when Maki was talking, I was thinking like, there's a very clear, well, teachers may not know it, but there's a very clear process for how you go from teacher to curriculum coordinator to vice principal to director. There's training, there's international training, there's university training. That process exists. It's existed for generations. But what I didn't exist until about 2010, 12, when I started in it. And so the going through that like tech integration even to get to tech coordinator is a weird way to do it. Usually it's some tech science in computer science degree person who knows how to fix all the equipment.
Or the math teacher. It always seems to be the math teacher.
Yeah. Or somebody who comes from pure tech and then comes into education, and then you try to get them like queued up to all the education stuff and so they can work together. And so I think I just kind of wanted to see what are some of the things like, I was very much very early on knew that I did not want to be 100% a classroom teacher forever. And so I started thinking, what are the things I could do? I can't teach music and I can't teach art. So those were out. I thought about PE for a little while. I thought about library, but then I was like, well, that's a lot of books you got to read. So then tech came along, and I had always been the person people came and asked questions because my brother was techie. So I would ask him questions and learn how to fix my own stuff. And then they'd come ask me. So that kind of seemed natural for me. And so it was more of like, what are the possibilities? What could be? What are the options for me? And that was what led me to it. And there were a lot of the videos gave me a lot of things to think about, and like how people got to different places, what their journey was, what the roadblocks they ran into. And I found a lot of the roadblocks to be very similar to in any, part of school. So that was, easy to connect with. There were a lot more similarities, I think, than I expected, maybe, in like how the paths went up. But it was just good for me to hear hear women talking about what they did in their role. I mean, I'm in a very non usually women role. So there are not a lot of upper level or lower level tech positions where you see women. Weirdly, I know like all the people I know are in those positions are always women. And I think that's just because I connected the right way to different people or whatever. But there are not a lot of women tech directors, women in especially high school and middle school tech integration. There's a lot more in elementary school. And so it was interesting to me to see specifically those people and how those women and how they made it up to where they were and what was their path and their direction to get there.
There's something about those personal stories. I do think there is something, and that's why I like hosting this podcast, because you get to hear people's unique journeys, and everybody has some moment that you're like, oh, I connect to that, or I never thought about it that way. There's always something that that resonates with you. And I just think that's amazing that you could have, I mean, in Women Who Lead, there's 70 plus women. I think by the time this episode airs, we're going to be on our like 200 and something episode. And like every single one of those conversations, there's like that, oh, wow. There is something about personal stories that brings maybe abstract concepts or abstract ideas to the concrete, to the real, to the personal, to your world. And you can see now, oh, I can apply that, or that's how that could work here, or that's what that might look like in my future, whatever the case may be. Thanks for joining us for today's conversation. Now that you've heard these stories of our Women Who Lead graduates, are you thinking about how you can leverage your leadership potential? Is it time to take the next step into leadership for you? If it is, join us for the next cohort of Women Who Lead. Registration for our 3rd annual global cohort is open right now. Our graduates consistently say that Women Who Lead help them see themselves as leaders, even when they didn't feel that way before they joined the cohort. Hearing the stories and experiences of over 70 successful women leaders in schools around the world allows you to see exactly what it's like pursuing a leadership pathway. You'll recognize the qualities that you already have that will make you a successful leader and exactly where you need to grow. Plus, you'll build your personal learning network of growing leaders in our connected, collaborative, and community-driven global cohort. Now is your chance to start to see yourself as a leader in whatever capacity feels right for you. Our global cohort opens only once a year. Get all the details at edurolearning.com/women. If you're curious right now and you have questions, please reach out. You can leave a comment below here on this YouTube video. You can join our Coach Better Facebook group or find us on social media at Eduro Learning and send me a DM. I'd love to chat with you about your leadership potential and how we can support you. See you next time.